the youth, the importance of the Christian education and upbringing of the next generation. That's what we're talking about tonight, right after this. Welcome back into the King's Forge. I'm Randy, and tonight we have John and Summer at the table, and we are discussing youth development, for lack of a better phrase, upbringing Christian youth in a world that sometimes makes it very hard, or sometimes maybe seemingly impossible to do, to impart Christian morality and ethics and understanding as kids grow in the midst of all the other information that's being hurled at them from every direction, from our schools and our televisions and interactions. And now we have devices a lot of kids have, and we try to protect our kids from a lot of things that they could potentially encounter on that platform. And the importance of the structure that we bring them up in, the importance of how we teach them and how we regard them, and the rearing of the next generation, as it were. So that's where we're at. Which one of you want to kick in first with this?
I guess I will.
There you go.
So I'm actually a youth and media minister, so I've got a little bit of experience with some youth over the last few years. And one of the things that I've noticed about teaching youth and being with youth is how thirsty that they are for Jesus, at least the ones that I've been blessed to be around. And I've also noticed that there's this perspective a lot of times that members of the church and multiple churches that I've been out and working with youth have had. And one of those is a lot of times we kind of marginalize the youth in a church. We don't always focus on them. Some churches have a older, I guess, demographic that they're made up of, and they tend to, the youth that they have, I've literally seen them say, well, we've got these tasks, we need this mulch done, or we need this wall painted, or we need the bus to be washed. Why don't we get the youth to do that? But then the question comes up, okay, that's good, they have the physical ability to do that. But wouldn't it be better if maybe your group made a donation to the youth group, since your group's the one that's doing this, and then to kind of be an encouragement, because we have a lot of activities and things we're trying to do and raise money for. It would be more encouraging to them. And as soon as that comes up, 9 times out of 10, we see a lot of those youth showing up to work and earn it. And you did mention earlier about technology and how the world is just kind of throwing stuff at the youth. A lot of that's some negative stuff that they're getting on their social media, and it's so much more in their face now than it used to be. But what I've also witnessed is I'm starting to see a turning away from that technology from a lot of the youth that we're ministering to at this point.
They are starting to be off-put by the bombardment of things that they themselves are finding distasteful. I'll agree with that. I want to share this story. One of the things that I've been involved with was a local church-based program that was called Mission Possible. And this was a sort of a youth retreat, sort of a opportunity for mission, and a workshop and discipleship all rolled into one. It was a very cool experience. We had the church facility had ample room. We had three, a downstairs and then a main floor, and then a portion of the building had an upstairs, so we had ample room upstairs to house the boys, and downstairs to house the girls. In the middle, we had basically we called that like a neutral area, if you will. And I say house because all the youth, along with chaperones, would be there 24/7. They'd sleep there overnight. We also had access to shower facilities and all that. We had an ample size fellowship hall with an ample size kitchen in order to feed them and get them ready. A lot we would. The program was local missions, and what I mean by that is we would start earlier in the year getting applications from people who are elderly or shut in or maybe even special needs assistance that needed help around with labor type stuff. Mm-hmm. Around their yards, cleaning fence rows, mowing the lawn, doing some light duty repairs, caulking windows, any of that kind of stuff. And we would spend this week doing all that. And we had enough youth. We had lots of youth. And the beautiful part about it is it wasn't just the youth of just that church. There were other youth that partnered and came from other places and came. And then we would divide them up in the morning, sort of the schedule, the way it worked. We would rise up in the morning. We'd head down to the sanctuary, and there'd be a morning devotional. Then we would go into the kitchen where we already had a crew that had come in. They'd signed up for volunteers to cook all the breakfast. We'd feed the kids, and they already had their lunches prepared. And the kids usually could choose. They usually have like different types of sandwiches, maybe peanut butter. And if you didn't like peanut butter or you had a peanut butter allergy or whatever, you could get something. There were other choices, fruit, that kind of stuff. So they picked their lunch, bagged it up, put it in the cooler with their team. We divided teams, yellow, blue, white, green, or whatever. And they usually were anywhere, if the group was large enough, they might have been 10 to a dozen kids per team with 2 adult chaperones with a team. We would then go out and load the coolers with the drinks and load the coolers with the lunches in the vehicles that that team had. And some of them times it was the church van followed by one of the chaperones' vehicle or whatever, and every team had a trailer with which to haul off debris and things like that. We had shovels, rakes, chainsaws, wheelbarrows, buckets. The local hardware store actually made donations of equipment and supplies and things like that. Some of the things we would purchase with money that the youth would raise and donations and things like that. And there's one, and then, okay, well, I'll come back to that. Then we would go out to our assignments. They were divvied up between the groups. We would go out. Each group had a list of assignments for that whole period. And we would go from assignment, tackle that, go to the next assignment, tackle that, go to the next assignment, tackle that. And then we'd all break for lunch, eat our lunch, have a little moment of rest, go back to work, finish all that. We'd go to the church early afternoon, early evening. They would go hit the showers. And then they would come back, and then they would have dinner. And then they would go to the sanctuary for I don't want to necessarily call it a sermon, but in all reality, it was a teaching, biblical-based teaching. And we would have a different guest speaker every night come in to do that. And then they would have worship. And the youth got pretty rowdy with their worship. Songs were done in such a way that you probably wouldn't, some churches, but most churches wouldn't hear them done quite this way on Sunday morning. And they had a blast of fun. And then they had downtime for a few hours to just fellowship with each other, play card games or do whatever. And then we would basically, go to sleep, divide up, and go to sleep, and start all over the next morning. This one particular memorable moment. My team was sent to a house with a lady that had a tree, large tree, we found out when we got there, that had fallen across her backyard and took down a portion of her fence. When we got there, we assessed the situation, and we already noticed the yard needed mowing. So I set 2 kids out with weed eaters and 1 with a mower to start on that. We already noticed that the gutters needed cleaning. we noticed that there were shutters off the house, and there was this great big tree. Well, the other chaperone that was with me, we don't let the kids use the big tools. So he grabbed the chainsaw and set about cutting that tree into manageable pieces, while I and the rest of the crew started hauling all of that and putting that on the tow behind trailer that we had. And that took a long time. And when we finally got all of that done, they set work with other implements and pruning shears and everything else, and clearing out that fence row so that we could then repair the fence. During this time, some of the youth, as they needed to go and use the restroom, would go into the house. And a couple of them came back and said, there is a hospital bed with a lady in it in the middle of the living room. And I didn't want to be intrusive, but I wanted to kind of understand more about the dynamic of what was going on here. And so I went and found out that this older lady that lived in the house, who had called us about all this stuff, was the daughter of the woman in the bed, she was also wheelchair bound. And they lived alone, just her and her mother, and she was her mother's caregiver. And I started realizing the dynamic of the situation and why she was having such a hard time keeping up with all the stuff that was going on. Mm-hmm. And so when I got a handle on that, I said, okay. And I went back and I said, okay, team, we need a couple of guys, go grab a ladder. I need a couple of you on the gutters, and then we're going to repair these shutters. And it was during that time, that went on. That kind of was the end of the morning. And then we went to lunch. Kids all grabbed their lunch and disappeared. And I had kind of assumed that they had gone for the shade of the trees at the tree line down there by the fence row. And they didn't. And I went around the back of the house, and when we got around to the back of the house, the woman who originally made the call sought me out, teary-eyed, but not sad, joyful. All the youth and her mother was in her wheelchair outside on the deck, and she said, my mother hasn't been outside the house in months. Wow. And she says, moreover than that, I have not heard my mother laugh, and I don't remember when. And the lady was laughing, and the kids were witnessing to her about Jesus and about what we were all about with Mission Possible and why we were doing the things that we were doing. And it's a mission of love, and no, you don't owe us any money. This is all for free. We're here to help just because God loves you, and God loves us and gave us the ability to help those who needed it. And it was just this beautiful moment. During that time, I found out that the lady's garage, her car was not parked in it. And I found out why it wasn't parked in it was because the entire garage was filled with trash. Because they lived in the county and they didn't have city service that came and hauled the trash away. She did not own a truck nor trailer, and she had gotten so backed up in trying to haul off the garbage in her house, and some of this was waste from a bedridden lady, which means there were things in there that were odoriferous, we'll say, to be polite. And I'm like, okay, this is not good. This is this is bad for health and everything. I said, so we got to. And the chaperone that was with me pointed out, we have a bedridden lady in here, wheelchair-bound lady, who spends most of her time in a bed or in a wheelchair. There's no ramp anywhere on this house. If some tragedy were to happen, they couldn't get her out. Mm-hmm. And so we contacted another one of the teams and said, requested, hey guys, bring some lumber, bring some stuff. And we didn't let the lady know, we're going to construct a wheelchair ramp. And we gloved up, and we got all the trash out, every bit of it, set it on the truck, cleaned the garage thoroughly, and then built a wheelchair ramp coming out the back door. And by the time we had left for the day, all this in the middle of summer, in sweltering Tennessee heat, we had removed and dissected a rather large tree, repaired a fence, cleaned a fence row, cleaned out all the gutters, repaired all the shutters, removed all the household trash, and cleaned and constructed a wheelchair ramp. And it was an all-day event at this one particular location. And everybody was exhausted. Everybody was tired. And on the way back, no one was down. No one, you knew they were exhausted and tired, but if you didn't know that, you would have never known that because, and all they could talk about was the lunch on the deck. Mm-hmm. That's all they could talk about. None of the labor mattered a hill of beans to them. I actually have photos of that day and all the stuff that went on. And that as an adult, at the time I was in my 40s. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I've got some age behind me. So I was in my 40s, and I'm working with these kids and everything, and we created this environment wherein the kids could use their God-given ability and even display their own talent in how they did things, while exempling discipleship of ourselves and witnessing the growth of discipleship in the kids, and they're the ones that did all of the witnessing. Mm-hmm. And the whole event is reciprocal. Not only did the two ladies gain something from that, the youth gained something from that, but we, the adults and chaperones and the people back at the church that were cooking the meals and preparing, and those who were delivering the message, all of us grew and gained something from that. And this is kind of what I'm talking about when I talk about the importance of teaching youth, and you touched on it about not marginalizing them, mm-hmm. is because our youth are often overlooked as being contributors to the ministry of the body, and all they're really looking for is the opportunity to show we can be part of this ministry too, and we have a lot to give. And I've witnessed that firsthand, mm-hmm. And that's just one example of that. So what's your experience on, let's speak a little more toward that marginalization and how maybe we can encourage people and what to look for to discover maybe I'm marginalizing our youth, and what would I be looking for to discover if I'm doing that?
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head about it. What you just explained was exactly what we're trying to do with our youth group, and that's getting them to focus externally. From a scripture standpoint, you hit on it. The body of Christ, the marginalization. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 12, essentially it says that just as a body has many parts, all of those many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. And what Paul's really saying here is that every single piece, every single part is important. We can't leave one piece of the body out and expect the entire body to function properly, right? He talks about this a little differently in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12. That's that one verse that you see at like every youth conference that has ever happened. They always talk about 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12, and essentially it says, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in life, in love, in faith, and in purity." And one of the things that I've really witnessed and seen in youth is they're thirsty for that. They're thirsty to get out and do stuff. Just sitting around and trying to teach them about the Bible is not enough. So our youth group, they've started thinking about what they could do in their community and how they could get out more. And it's that interaction and that witness that they're actually craving and wanting to get out and do.
Well, I want to stop for a mm-hmm. second and touch on one little thing. I don't want to divert us from our topic, but mm-hmm. You just said teaching the Bible is not enough. And I would submit that a lot of adults are in that ballpark where they're there as a student to acquire information, Bible information, mm-hmm. but they're not actualizing that information. They're not putting that into action and living the tenets or the message behind the information. And I think that has created an atmosphere within many churches that this is what we're doing and this is what we expect the youth to do. And I think the youth, in their pureness of heart and their vision, say there's so much more that we can do. And I think that there's a hunger not to settle for what is. And I'm not saying that there's anything necessarily wrong with Bible study. Of course there's not. Or there's anything inherently wrong. But I think what they're saying is we have this, all that we have.
How does this apply to life?
Not
How do
only
we
that,
apply it?
not only that, but of everything that we have that we're so grateful for, there is an unlimited supply of more. And they want to know what the more is.
Yeah, and to kind of caveat off of that, so they decided that one of the good things they could do that was a quick, simple thing to do was to create this blessing box. So they did the blessing box, and Pastor Summers talked about it in previous podcasts, so I won't expand upon it, how going through the entire process of it, but they built this box, they put it out there so we could put food and clothing and things for the homeless because they wanted to connect with the homeless community in a way. And there were some naysayers in our church. And in fact, 2 of them came up to me recently after this has been in place for several months and has told me, John, when you said you were going to do this, I was worried about the element that was going to attract to our church. And that hurt.
Yeah.
That hurt me. But he said, they both said, you're right. You were right. And that's not what's happened. And in fact, people coming in and asking for money and asking for food has actually gone down. Because our parking lot is active 7 days a week now. Instead of it just being active on Wednesdays and Sundays, on Saturdays, it looks like a McDonald's drive-through in our church parking lot because people are coming through getting food constantly. Sometimes 6, 8, 10 an hour going through there as I kind of monitor things that are going on. Well, we started connecting with the homeless community that way, and the youth have been bringing stuff, and in some cases, they've stopped and had conversations with them. Well, recently, we were putting a roof on our playground. The youth decided to tackle that project, and we started doing it, and lo and behold, a couple found out that we were putting a roof on the playground, and the guy said, well, I can do that. I know how to do it. Next thing you know, homeless people were showing up and helping the youth group with their youth projects. And that just, it was one of those tear-filled moments, and then you see a homeless guy crawling up on a ladder, nailing shingles into a roof, and it was just like that is what it was all about because he had nothing to give, but he knew how, and he was so appreciative of what the youth had done and the time that they had spent with him and his wife and other people in the homeless community that they've been coming and contributing to the church itself. And I just think that's a big example of the doing part of church, and it's sad that I'm kind of in one of those statistician type guys. I look at a lot of stats, and I've sent you a few from time to time, and one that I keep seeing over and over is that 7 out of 10 youth leave the church at age 18.
Yeah.
Out of those 7, 5 eventually return, which is not bad, but at the same time, that puts 8 out of 10 youth leaving the church. That's not a horrible number, but it does go along with scripture that says, if you raise them up in the ways, they will return. And they do, but there ends up being that gap from 18 to 25, 27-ish that's almost invisible in the church.
And also the ultimate sorrow of that statistic is that for every 10 youth that come through the church, we're losing 2. And we have to find a way to prepare the youth for the world. I think this is part of what I think we're failing here as a universal church, to really genuinely prepare the youth for the world they're walking into. We have tried very hard to teach them about the dangers of but we do so in such a way that it's still not as black and white to them in their understanding. The devil walks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. We say, quote scriptures like that to them. And because of our experience in life, we have insight into that scripture. And yet, oftentimes, we give them the scripture and fail to give them some of those insights, because I think all kids, all youth, have one thing in common. One. And a friend of mine told me this, and it's very true, and I've thought about it since he told me to. And a lot of people, if you ask them what is it, they would say, well, probably sex on the mind. And no, that's not true. That's not what it is. They all want to be treated with the respect and understanding given to an adult, but they still seek the structure that they've known and that gives them their sense of security and comfort that they've had since they were smaller. Mm-hmm. And they're in the middle period. Mm-hmm. And we as adults sometimes don't want to speak to them as if they're adults, and we are trepidatious about giving them information that they actually need. This is the time they need that information, but we think that, well, maybe that's too much of an adult topic and the illusion was enough. And I think we fall short there.
I think we absolutely do. That's one of the reasons why when we do our teaching moments, we talk about not just verses and what they might mean. We talk about the context of the verses, and we dig deeper into the scriptures, and we've actually had them from the respect standpoint and treating them as an adults. What we've started to do on Sunday nights is they lead it. They lead their own worship service now every Sunday night at our church, and a different youth gets up and they bring the message. They pick the songs, they pick everything out. It's all on them what they want to do. And when I first offered this to volunteer, of course my son was the first one to volunteer. Nobody else would do it. And once he got up and did it, they were like, wow, that was really good. We want to do that too. And then we had the next 4 weeks lined up immediately with people that were wanting to get up there and they were wanting to share what they had. And that's why I keep saying, I have absolutely learned probably more from our youth than I think I've taught them, because of the way that they're acting, and they have jumped in. And I think that caveat right along with that respect thing, treat them as if they are adults, but give them that added security that they need because they're not quite there yet.
I hope you don't feel like we're ignoring you, Summer. No, you're quiet at the end of the table then. There's a question. One of the things I think that's critically important also when you're dealing about teaching and growing up youth in a good and healthy environment and in a Christian setting is that offering them the opportunity to be frank in discussion and not to shoot down any idea, even if the question that they ask is controversial. I think many kids have a lot of questions that they want to ask, but they're intimidated or scared to ask them because of the nature of the question. I made a little farcical, that teens kind of have, procreation on the mind. A lot of them do. This is a time when their hormones are changing, their bodies are developing, and they're trying to figure out how to live and handle a lot of these things that are going on in them. And they want to talk to adults about it, and I think we fail them, and I think this is part of the reason why we see some people succumb to the lure of promiscuity, or we see people falling into relationships that are not healthy, and finding out the hard way that they should not have been involved with the person that they chose, either because of some sort of domestic violence situation or because some other behavior that they've encountered that they weren't expecting and did not understand how to see signs of because they weren't prepared for it. how do we foster in our church environment an atmosphere of total openness that says you can ask any question here, no matter how controversial it might seem, and we're going to try to answer it biblically? How would we do that?
You have to start the conversations by having those conversations first. It comes in your teaching and in your sermons of being willing to speak the truth and being open to talking about even your experience. I've personally been open about talking about my experiences. I mean, since we're talking about youth tonight, my experiences as a young person and my own falling away from faith, and the impact that God had, the church has had on my life growing up, and just being open and willing to listen. And I think that is another area of our church life in terms of our youth, and keeping a balance between the older generation and the younger generation is teaching the older generation to have open ears and to hear our youth. And that also, again, will come in from having the youth lead in worship, to the youth speaking. I have our prayer team who also meets at the same time on Sunday night as the youth meets, join their worship service, just to participate in the worship service, just to be there in the sanctuary. And they really enjoy it. And they're also hearing the wise words of our youth, preaching the gospel, preaching from the Bible. And they are amazed, and they're able to then be open to listening, because they're like, wow, they have something to share. And so just opening those lines of communication is vital between multiple generations, and also just between leaders and those who sit in the pews.
Awesome. John, you've known me for a long time.
Yeah, 30 years or so.
And Summer, you've known of me basically since you and John have been married. And my thing, I love to try to get people to the place that, not necessarily of danger, but uncomfortableness. I think if we're comfortable with what we're doing, we're not pushing the boundary quite enough. And I've had this thought, this idea, and I'm running it by you and every single one of our listeners right now, because I want your input on this. I want to think, where do you see the possibilities of this going? Do you think something like this could and should be tried, and things like that? So a church with youth, and you have, of course, adults. I would love to see an accountability, mentorship, discipleship program within the church where you are accountable and responsible for 1 year, where you volunteer, it's a voluntary basis, but you're volunteering, I will mentor this young person, this youth. I'm not talking about children age, I'm talking about youth age, high school age kids. I will mentor this young person for 1 year, and I agree to be a mentor. Well, then you take all of the youth and you put their names into a hat or a box, and you draw a kid, and the one rule is the child that you mentor cannot be your own. Because I would assume that you're already trying to do that with your own child. So, and for 1 year, you are pledging to help this kid. You're pledging to give them advice if they need an adult to talk to. You're doing this within the confines of the assistance of the church. This is not running willy-nilly. I'm not trying to pair some solo adult with some solo child, and because that could be problematic. So it's going to be a structured program and overseen by the church and things like that. But some accountability to be able to say, I do have some things to offer the youth, and I do have a willingness to communicate with them and learn from them because a lot of kids. Well, we say we understand our children. Well, I understand. I went through all the same thing. Well, it wasn't the same as in your day as it was in mine. We like to discount that because of our accumulated knowledge. But the fact is, that argument's true. My son could look at me today. It's not the same as it was in your day, Dad. And I can tell you, it's not by any means.
Yeah.
And so we have to be open to listening to them and giving them counsel from the wisdom of this side of adulthood. I've learned a lot of things. I've spent a lot of time. If I was to encounter whatever your, insert question here, this is exactly what I would do today, knowing what I know now. And this is why.
Well, a couple of things about that. For one, you would have to set some boundaries in that area, and you wouldn't want to just, maybe not necessarily put all the names of the youth in a hat, but for one example, one church that I was a part of was actually my home church before I was in ministry. At the time of confirmation, which is a very pivotal moment for a preteen, young teenage person in the church to learn about the aspects of church life, they were charged with picking someone in the church that was not a family member, that was strong in the church, like a leader, someone who volunteered, someone who was well known in the church, to be their mentor. And that worked out very well. So maybe for the youth to have an opportunity to pick from people whom you as the church pastor or leader said, these people are strong leaders and have had background checks and are willing to be mentors, have the youth pick one to be their mentor, but also make sure to line out what that means for them, to where it's having a once a month meetup or sending cards and maybe a phone call, just setting up guidelines to, okay, what does that look like? What does being a mentor look like?
Yeah, and I understand. I know I gave a very brief, and I can see a lot of the holes and the gaps that I left out because, parents are going to have to be involved and all this kind of stuff. And I get that. And so I'm not talking about just running this, loose and in the wind. But I'm saying we need to encourage the older people, the adults in our congregation, to be more active and interactive with the youth, not just your children, and don't be interactive with the youth just because your children are a part of them. You may not have children, or your children may also be adults, but you can still assist and uplift and educate and mentor Christian youth and be an influence and have also your world changed for the better because of their interaction and presence too. I don't think we see that in a lot of churches on that level. And I think that's an important thing that we miss. We talk about children. When children are baptized often in church, I've heard this emphasized more than I do with adults. I mean, they've accepted Christ and now their baptism, and we say, okay, all of you people that are here witnessing this, you are accountable for this soul. You're here to witness this. You are the spiritual brothers and sisters of this person. And as older siblings, it is your responsibility in the family of God to look after your little brother or sister. Are we really doing that, emphasizing that, or could we do more? And how?
Well, for one, I mean, honestly, your idea is very good. It's just making sure that when we do those things in churches, wherever those churches are, that we have the conversations to know what we're doing. And that would be one of those conversations, is what you just mentioned, is talking to the adults in the church to say, hey, this is what needs to happen for our youth. We need mentors. We need you guys to take ownership of the spiritual discipleship and the formation of our young people, to recognize their importance in the church life and to train them in the way they should go, that it takes a church to be a church to our young people. And if we don't want them to leave when they become 18 and go off to college, if we want to have them have good memories of church life, then we need to establish those good memories, you know, and to have that conversation with our older adults. I mean, even from age 30 on, adults, to have that conversation and say, are we fostering our young people? Are we recognizing that they do exist and supporting them in their ministries? Or do we want to throw a fit because VBS decorations have taken over the sanctuary?
Ding, ding, ding.
You know, little nitpicky things like that can really cause a child to think, oh, they don't care about me.
Right, yeah.
And this is why I think this would be a fantastic idea, because like I said before, I've learned so much from the youth. I think I may have learned more from them than I've taught them, and that comes from the difference of three things, really: knowing what wisdom is, and the difference between wisdom and tradition and why we do those things, and then the difference between tradition and biblical laws that have rewards and consequences that go along with them. Because one thing that I've noticed is how deep questions that the youth group asks. For instance, we were playing a praise song, and we got done with the praise song, and next thing you know, the youth started asking questions. And one of the questions that came up is, hey, Brother John, what's a Paschal sacrifice? You know, you're going to have to be able to answer some of these in-depth questions. If you don't know, it's okay to say, I don't know. Let's look it up together, you know. And so there's going to be some questions that are going to come up. And for that point, I think that would be an absolutely fantastic program. And I think the adults may benefit from it just as much as the youth would.
You know, and I know this is, some people may hear this and may even be offended by it. I hope you're not. But I often have, well, I shouldn't say often, I have seen a youth program at a church that kind of had a great intent and started strong, and it fizzled in about 2 years. And there were some problems that came about, and some kids that were lost from the congregation, and some things happened. And a lot of people were very quick to point out that it's the fault of the poor youth directors, poorly equipped, poorly executed, people unfit for that task. And my issue was, it is not the fault. The failure of the youth ministry of this body of church was never the fault of the people who actually tried to engage in it. It's the fault of everyone who never lifted a finger and never voiced their opinion and never wanted to participate. That is why it failed, because it was not supported, and it was not prayed for, and it was not upheld by the body of the church, all of us. It takes all the people of the church to execute the ministry of the church. Some of the ministry is within, some of the ministry, much of it, is without those walls. And we all have to be committed to be a part of that. And I know that's a strong way to come at that, but I've seen things like that happen. And I think that part of the, when we do have problematic issues and we are failing, it's because the rest of the body of the church is not involved enough. I hear scandalous reports where, you may have a youth director that was caught up in some very inappropriate scandal. I got news for you. The likelihood of that happening, if every single eye and hand that was in the church was there to be assistant, drops dramatically.
Yep. Likely never would have happened. Yeah.
Because, so it is the absence of the rest of the body that allows those sorts of things to manifest to a degree. I'm not saying solely, but to a large degree, a lot of those things could be mitigated were everyone attentive and involved and participatory. That's the thing.
I think one of the important things to note from what you're saying, truth be told, youth leaders, youth ministers, that position in churches is a revolving door, oftentimes for that reason, because they do not feel supported, or the youth ministers themselves will see this is a beginning position to other areas of ministry. And so many churches will have that revolving door of youth pastors, and who suffers from that is the youth. And it's oftentimes not because, well, another youth leader has left, how dare they, but the church wasn't there to support the youth to begin with, because if the church was there and they had enough adult volunteers from the church, a youth pastor leaving would not sting as much.
Yeah.
If they had enough volunteers and mentors
Yeah.
to support the youth.
Yeah, we've seen that work both ways. Yeah.
And youth ministers will leave for the bigger churches or for different areas of ministry, oftentimes because they have more resources and better pay in other areas of ministry than they do for youth and children.
Yeah, very true.
Very true.
So, if that's the case, I think that we are, while we're endeavoring to do all we can, the fact that we're not doing all that we can means that we're doing our youth a disservice if that's where we find ourselves. If you are a Christian, if you are a believer and you're active with your belief, then you are part of the ministry of the church. And you're either a good and effective and faithful servant minister, or you're a poor one. There's no two ways about it. I would hope that everyone would want to be a good one, and it doesn't matter how much you think you know about the Scripture. It doesn't matter how long. I've only been a Christian for 3 years. It doesn't matter. The question is your heart in the right place? Are you willing to try? You will learn on the way. And I know of pastors that have been pastoring 27, 28 years and go, you know what I just learned?
Yep.
Wait a minute, you've been doing this 28 years. You didn't know it all? No, nobody knows it all.
Nobody does.
We all, I don't care how long you've been in active ministry on whatever level, none of us are Jesus Christ. None of us know what he knows. And we're all in this together, and that's why it takes everyone, because we each have individual giftings that help each other out. Where I may be lacking, you may be strong. We each have not only giftings, but differing abilities. You may be able to do things I just can't do, and so when we work together and using our giftings and our abilities and our strengths to bring to the table what we're strong in, that's when all ministries, not just our youth ministry, but all ministry really flourishes. Churches can grow, and they become this dynamic place where the actualization of the true Christian experience just really starts to blossom, because that's what people are looking for. I think people are sick and tired of a Christian experience that feels devoid of one aspect or another. Well, I heard the word, but I didn't feel the Spirit. Well, I felt the Spirit, but the teaching's kind of lacking. And all these different things that you hear from different people. Number one, sometimes we can be too critical, and we're trying to look for things that make us feel good sometimes. But at the other end is sometimes those comments are very true. Then you do have those areas where people lack, and that's because the person that's there that has that talent or gifting has not stepped up to answer the call. And that's what we need. And so if you really want if you really want your youth, your kids, if you're a parent, if you want them to have everything that they can have from the Christian experience in your local area, in your local church, get active, become a part, and encourage all the other adults around you, whether they have kids in the youth or not, to participate. You know, I'm a father, and I have no problem going to other men in a church that aren't fathers and say, my son needs you.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter needs you. Their daughters and sons need you. You have something to contribute. You have something to bring to the table. We've got to stop sort of being lackadaisical about the way that we approach our youth, because our youth are noticing it, and I think that's part of what contributes to this loss that we discussed earlier. They don't feel appreciated. They don't feel acknowledged. They don't feel rewarded, and they're going to go and gravitate towards those places and situations that give them those things that they think they need. So if they don't feel like they're getting enough attention or recognition or praise or whatever from the church, and the world is out here wanting to say, hey, I'll give you some recognition and attention, and I'll give you some praise or whatever, even though it may be horrible for them, they're going to gravitate toward that because that's what's missing. That's what's missing.
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
Well, have we exhausted this topic?
I think so.
I
The only
think we
thing that
have.
I can say is if you're going to be involved in youth ministry, just be prepared to not know all the answers.
Be prepared.
You're not gonna. You're not gonna.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Hey, for everybody who listens to this podcast or who watches our videos or whatever, we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for tuning in. We hope that today's discussion has blessed you and benefited you in some way. We hope that it's called attention to maybe something that's been burning on your heart. Maybe you're feeling called toward a youth teaching ministry. Maybe we've stepped on your toes and you're feeling a little guilty because maybe you're thinking I should be more active and I'm not. Whatever. Hey, we're not here to condemn or hurt anyone. We're here to inform you. We're here to uplift you. We're here to encourage you. Get involved. Become part of the conversation. Join us at the table because that's what this is all about. The table is open, folks. Come sit and grow with us. Learn with us. Love with us. That's what we're here for. That's what we're about. And we would love to discuss any topic that's burning in your heart and mind. And if you want to give us those topics, we'd love to hear from you. You can contact us by writing onekingsforge@gmail.com. That's the number 1, kingsforge@gmail.com. You can also contact us by post by writing to the King's Forge, P.O. Box 2590, Shelbyville, Tennessee, 37160. And as always, if you're looking for backlog content or older podcasts and you want to sort of listen to something maybe you've missed or just revisit what you listened to 3 years ago, you can find all that by going to our website at thekingsforge.org. Once again, thank you very much. We love you. We want you happy. We want you blessed. And we want you back here in the King's Forge. Thank you.
You know, as Christians, one of the hardest things that we seem to be able to do is to take a good, hard, introspective look at ourselves. But that's exactly the purpose of the Bible. The Bible was meant to change the individual believer, to change our heart, to change our mind, and ultimately to change our behavior. If you've ever wondered, am I fully in? If you've ever wondered, am I walking in the fullness of genuine, empowered Christianity? Or do I sometimes feel like maybe there's something missing? I've written a book to explore those avenues and get us to talk about it. It's called Christianity Untried, and I would be grateful if you would head on over to barnesandnoble.com and order a copy for yourself.